First contact gone wrong. The UES Endeavour cruised through the inky void of unexplored space, its silver hull gleaming under the distant light of alien suns. Captain Mira Shan stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the holographic display that mapped their progress. Another day, another sector to map, she mused, glancing over at her first officer, Commander Tyson Rye. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever find anything out here besides rocks and gas giants. Rye chuckled. Be careful what you wish for, Captain. I'd rather have a boring survey mission than. A sudden proximity alert cut him off. The display flashed red as a massive, unidentified vessel dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path. Evasive maneuvers, Shan barked. The Endeavour banked hard to port, narrowly avoiding a collision. Hail them, all frequencies. The comms officer, Lieutenant Kira Voss, worked frantically at her console. No response, Captain. But we're being scanned. Some kind of high-intensity sensor sweep. Shan's brow furrowed. This was no ordinary first contact scenario. The alien ship, a jagged behemoth bristling with angular protrusions, dwarfed the Endeavour. Its hull was a mottled green and bore no markings that the human ship's databases could identify. Raise shields, charge weapons, Shan ordered. But hold fire. We don't want to provoke them. No sooner had she spoken than a searing beam of emerald energy lanced out from the alien vessel, raking across the Endeavour's bow shields. The deck shuddered under Shan's feet as warning klaxons blared. Shields at 60%, Rye reported, his voice tight. Captain, they're firing again. The second shot punched through the weakened shields like they were paper, scorching a molten line along the Endeavour's hull. Conduits ruptured, venting atmosphere and crew into the pitiless void. Return fire, Shan roared. Target their weapons. The Endeavour's ion cannons and missile batteries spoke as one, hurling a storm of ordnance at the attacking ship. But the alien hull seemed to absorb the impacts, shrugging off the human weapons like raindrops. Another plasma beam slammed into the Endeavour's midsection, breaching the engine compartment. Secondary explosions rippled through the dying ship. Captain, we've lost main power, Rye reported grimly. Weapons offline. Shields gone. We're dead in the water. Shan's mind raced. This was no mere misunderstanding, no tragic case of cross-cultural confusion. The aliens had fired first, and without warning. And now her ship, her crew, were paying the price. Abandoned ship, she said heavily. All hands to the escape pods. We'll make our stand from there. As the bridge crew scrambled to obey, Shan's gaze locked with Rye's. In his eyes, she saw the same realization that haunted her own thoughts. They had been lucky to survive this long. The alien ship could have destroyed them outright, which meant this attack was something else, a message, a declaration of war. The Endeavour shook again as another plasma beam carved through its guts. Shan gripped the arms of her chair, riding out the impact. They'd never make it to the pods at this rate. Voss, transmit all logs to Fleet Command, highest priority, she ordered. They need to know what happened here. Aye, Captain. Transmitting now. Shan drew in a breath, tasting smoke and ozone. So this was how it ended. Not with a whimper, but with a bang. A fitting epitaph for the Endeavour and her crew. But even as the thought crossed her mind, a new resolve hardened in her gut. This wasn't the end. Not for humanity. Not by a long shot. They would make the aliens pay for what they'd done here today. Even if it took 100 years, 1,000. The fury of Earth would not be denied. The final plasma beam struck, and the Endeavour vanished in a cataclysmic fireball that lit the stars. The Zorax warship, Krathic Sol, loomed over the shattered remains of the human vessel, its hull still glowing from the heat of its weapons. On the bridge, Commander Zarnthok stood impassive, his reptilian eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. The prey fought back, he remarked to his subordinate, Sub-Commander Krinval. More than expected. Krinval hissed agreement. Their weapons were primitive, no match for our shields. But their spirit, there is steel in these humans, Zarnfak clicked his teeth dismissively. Spirit matters little. They are scattered, divided. We will burn their worlds and feast on their despair. He turned to the comms officer. Send word to the Imperium. The invasion begins now. As the transmission beamed out across the light years, Zarnfak allowed himself a razor-edged smile. The humans would fall, like so many before them. Their pitiful defiance would only make the victory all the sweeter. And yet, in some deep primordial corner of his mind, a flicker of unease stirred. The humans had fought to the last, even against impossible odds. Such fury, such wrath. It spoke to something ancient and formidable. Zarnfak shook off the thought. The Zoraks were the masters of the stars. No primitive species could stand against them. And if the humans tried, they would learn the true meaning of hell. Humans strike back. Fleet Admiral Silas Graves stood on the bridge of the UEF Retribution, his weathered face set in lines of grim determination. The loss of the Endeavor had sent shockwaves through the United Earth Federation. What had begun as a tragic act of aggression had swiftly escalated into a full-scale war. Status report, Graves barked, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. All ships in position, sir, replied Captain Noravance, his second in command. The Zorak stronghold is just ahead, orbiting the gas giant. Graves nodded, his eyes tracking the pulsing red icon that marked their target. The Zoraks had moved swiftly after the Endeavor's destruction, launching raids on human colonies and outposts. But they'd underestimated the speed and fury of the human response. This ends today, Graves said, his voice a low growl. We'll show these bastards what it means to pick a fight with humanity. The Retribution shuddered as its main engines flared to life, propelling the massive battleship forward. Around it, a dozen other human warships fell into formation, their hulls bristling with weapons. Zorak ships incoming, called out the sensor officer. Reading 20. No, 30 signatures. They're moving to intercept. Graves bared his teeth in a feral grin. Let them come. All ships, fire at will. Give them hell. The human fleet opened fire as one, unleashing a storm of missiles and energy beams. The Zorak ships responded in kind, their plasma cannons painting the void with searing light. The battle was joined, and the stars trembled. The Retribution shook as a plasma beam grazed its shields, alarms blaring across the bridge. But Graves never flinched, his eyes locked on the enemy. Keep firing, he ordered. Focus on their lid ships. We need to punch a hole through their lines. The human weapons found their marks, missiles and railgun rounds hammering into Zorak's hulls. One by one, the alien ships began to falter, their shields failing under the onslaught. But the Zoraks gave as good as they got. Human ships exploded into fire and shrapnel as plasma beams found vulnerable spots in their armor. The Retribution's shields flared and died, its hull scorched and pitted. Forward batteries, fire. Graves roared. The Retribution's main cannon spoke, hurling shells the size of shuttlecraft at the nearest Zorak's battleship. The alien vessel staggered under the impacts, its hull crumpling like tin foil. And then, through the chaos of battle, Graves saw it. A gap in the Zorak's formation, a path to the stronghold. It was a tiny chance, a fleeting opportunity. But he'd be damned if he let it slip away. All ships, concentrate fire on Sector 7 Alpha, he ordered. Punch us a hole. We're going in. The human fleet obeyed, pouring fire into the weakened Zorak's line. And like a miracle, the alien ships broke, scattering before the fury of human weapons. Full speed ahead, Graves called. Ramming speed. The Retribution surged forward, its engines howling, straight into the heart of the Zorak stronghold. Graves braced himself against his command chair, feeling the deck shudder beneath his feet. Braced for impact, Vance shouted. The Retribution slammed into the Zorak station like the fist of an angry god. Metal screamed and tore, atmosphere venting into the void. The human ship plowed onwards, smashing through bulkheads and decks, trailing fire and destruction. And then, with a final titanic groan, the Zorax stronghold shattered into a million pieces. The Retribution emerged from the expanding cloud of debris, its hull battered but unbroken. A ragged cheer went up from the human crew. They had done it. Struck a blow against the Zorax that would echo across the stars. But Graves didn't join in the celebration. His gaze was fixed on the tactical display, on the remaining Zorax ships still fighting and dying. This was only the beginning. There would be more battles to come, more blood to be shed. And yet, in that moment, he allowed himself a grim smile. The Zorax had started this war. But by all that was holy, humanity would finish it, even if they had to chase the bastards to the very gates of hell. In the shattered ruins of the Zorax stronghold, Commander Zarn Fok pulled himself from the wreckage, his once proud uniform torn and stained. He had barely made it to an escape pod before the station's destruction, and now he stood amidst the floating debris, his eyes burning with hate. The humans had struck a mighty blow this day. They had shattered the illusion of Zorax invincibility, shown the galaxy that the Imperium could bleed. But in doing so, they had sealed their own doom. For now, the Zorax would stop at nothing to see humanity crushed beneath their heel. This insult could not stand. It would not stand. You think you know fury, humans, Zarn Fok hissed into the void. You think you know wrath. But you have awoken the sleeping giant. And now, there will be no mercy. No quarter. We will not stop until your worlds are ashes and your species a bitter memory. He activated his distress beacon, summoning the ship to retrieve him. There was much to be done. Fleets to muster, strategies to devise. The humans thought this was their finest hour, but in truth, it was only the beginning of their end. For the Zorax Emperor did not take defeat lightly, and his vengeance would be terrible to behold. Unlikely alliances. The Krell ambassador towered over the human delegation, his 4 eyes glinting in the dim light of the conference room. Captain Nora Vance had to crane her neck to meet his gaze, but she refused to be intimidated. The Zorax have been a plague upon our people for generations, the ambassador said, his voice a low rumble. They raid our worlds, enslave our young, and leave only ashes in their wake. Vance nodded grimly. She had seen the aftermath of Zorax aggression firsthand, the burned-out colonies, the shattered lives. We have faced their wrath as well, she said. They struck without warning, without mercy. Thousands of our people died in the first days of the war. The ambassador's eyes narrowed. And yet you fight back. You strike at their strongholds, shatter their fleets. You have done what we thought impossible. Vance allowed herself a small smile. We humans are full of surprises. The ambassador leaned forward, his massive frame filling the room. The Krell have long sought an ally against the Zorax. Someone to stand with us, to fight by our side. Perhaps in humanity, we have found such an ally. Vance met his gaze unflinchingly. The United Earth Federation is willing to stand with any who oppose Zorax aggression. But we must know that our allies are true, that they will not falter when the fighting grows fierce. The ambassador barked a laugh, a sound like boulders grinding together. You need not question Krell resolve, human. We have faced the Zorax for centuries. We have never faltered, never surrendered. And with humanity by our side, we will see the Imperium brought to its knees. Vance extended her hand, a human gesture of agreement. The ambassador engulfed it in his own massive paw, his grip firm but not crushing. Then let this be the beginning of a new alliance, Vance said. One forged in the fires of war, tempered by the fury of our combined might. The ambassador nodded solemnly. Together, we will teach the Zorax the true meaning of fear. As the meeting adjourned and the delegates went their separate ways, Vance couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The Krell were powerful allies. Their ships and weapons advanced beyond anything the Federation possessed. With them by their side, humanity stood a fighting chance against the Zorax onslaught. They could strike back harder, push the invaders from their space, and shatter the Imperium's hold on the galaxy. But even as the thought crossed her mind, Vance felt a flicker of unease. The Krell were fierce, their ways alien and unyielding, and desperation made for strange bedfellows. She could only hope that this alliance, forged in the heat of war, would not burn them all in the end. The Zorax Emperor brooded upon his throne, his eyes fixed on the holographic display that hovered before him. The loss of the stronghold had been a bitter blow, a humiliation that could not go unanswered. But it was the news of the human-Krell alliance that truly set his blood to boiling. The Krell were old enemies, their hatred for the Zorax Imperium a festering wound that had never healed. To see them join with the upstart humans, it was an insult beyond measure, a slight that demanded retribution. "Your Majesty," came a simpering voice from the foot of the throne. "The fleet stands ready. We await only your command to launch the next offensive." The Emperor waved a dismissive hand, his eyes never leaving the display. "The humans and their Krell lapdogs believe they have gained the upper hand," he mused, his voice a sibilant hiss. "They think their pitiful alliance will be enough to stand against the might of the Imperium." He rose from the throne, his towering form casting a long shadow across the chamber. "But they have no idea what true power looks like, no concept of the fury they have unleashed." The Emperor's eyes gleamed with a cold, ruthless light. "Ready the fleet," he commanded, "and prepare the devourer. It is time to show these primitives the true face of hell." The underlings scurried to obey, leaving the Emperor alone with his thoughts. He had underestimated the humans once, dismissed them as just another species to be crushed beneath the Zorax heel. But no more. Now he would show them the true meaning of fear. He would unleash upon them a horror beyond their darkest nightmares. And when the last human world burned, and the Krell lay shattered at his feet, the galaxy would know the price of defiance. For the Zorax Imperium did not forgive, and it never, ever forgot. Deep in Krell space, in a system whose name was a closely guarded secret, a fleet gathered. Krell warships, their hulls adorned with the scars of countless battles, drifted in formation alongside the sleek, silver shapes of human vessels. Fighters darted between the larger ships like shoals of deadly fish, their pilots eager for the coming fight. On the bridge of the UEF Retribution, Admiral Graves stood shoulder to shoulder with the Krell commander, a grizzled veteran named Karnvak. They'd made for an odd pair, the Krell towering over the human by a good 3 feet. But there was a kinship between them, a shared resolve born of loss and pain. They had both seen their people suffer at the hands of the Zorax, watched helplessly as the Imperium's cruelty snuffed out innocent lives. No more. "The Zorax will not expect an attack so deep in their territory," Karnvak rumbled, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "They believe themselves safe, protected by the might of their fleets." Graves nodded grimly. "Pride goeth before the fall," he murmured, an old human saying that seemed fitting for the moment. Karnvak glanced at him, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You humans have a way with words," he said. "But yes, the Zorax are prideful, and that pride will be their undoing." Graves turned to face the Krell commander fully, his expression serious. "This alliance between our peoples, it's more than just a military pact. It's a symbol, a message to the galaxy that the Zorax are not invincible, that their reign of terror can be ended." Karnvak placed a massive hand on Graves' shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie that would have been unthinkable mere months ago. "Together, we will show them the true meaning of unity," the Krell said, "the true strength that comes from standing against a common foe." Graves nodded, feeling the weight of history upon him. This was more than just another battle, another campaign in an endless war. This was a turning point, a moment that would echo through the ages, a chance to strike a blow against tyranny and oppression that would be felt across the stars. "Then let us begin," he said, his voice ringing with resolve. "Let us show the Zorax what happens when they dare to cross humanity and the Krell." The fleet moved out, a united front against the darkness, and in their wake, The stars themselves seemed to tremble with anticipation. For the reckoning had come at last, and the fury of the righteous would be a terrible thing to behold. Behind enemy lines, Sergeant Lena Kovalenko crept through the dimly lit corridors of the Zorax outpost, her heart pounding in her ears. The infiltration had been a risky gambit, a desperate ploy to gain intelligence on the Imperium's next move. But so far, it seemed to be paying off. Beside her, Private Jax Renner kept a watchful eye on their rear, his rifle at the ready. They were an odd pair, the grizzled veteran and the fresh-faced recruit. But in the heat of battle, such distinctions mattered little. They were all soldiers now, united in their determination to bring the Zorax to their knees. The command center should be just ahead, Kovalenko murmured, consulting the stolen schematics on her wrist comp. With any luck, we'll be able to tap into their communications, get a bead on their next target. Renner nodded, his jaw tight with tension. He was young, but he had seen his share of horror in this war. They all had. As they approached the command center, Kovalenko held up a fist, signaling for Renner to halt. There were voices coming from ahead, the guttural snarls of Zorax warriors. Kovalenko pressed herself against the wall, her rifle at the ready. They had to time this perfectly. One false move, and they'd be discovered. The voices grew louder, and then, with a sudden burst of movement, a pair of Zorax soldiers rounded the corner. They were massive, their reptilian skin glistening in the dim light. Kovalenko didn't hesitate. She opened fire, her rifle spitting controlled bursts. Renner joined in, and together, they cut the Zorax down before they could even raise their weapons. But the noise of the firefight echoed through the corridors, and already, Kovalenko could hear the pounding of booted feet, the shouts of alarm. "Go!" she yelled to Renner, sprinting for the command center. "We've got to get that data." They burst into the room, rifles at the ready. A trio of Zorax technicians spun to face them, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Kovalenko leveled her weapon at the nearest one, her voice cold. "Step away from the consoles. Now." The technicians complied, their hands raised in surrender. Renner kept them covered while Kovalenko moved to the main terminal, her fingers flying over the alien controls. "Downloading now," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. Come on. The data scrolled across the display, reams of alien text and schematics. Kovalenko's eyes widened as she took it in, her heart sinking in her chest. "Oh no," she breathed. "This is bad. This is really bad." Renner glanced over, his brow furrowed. "What is it? What did you find?" Kovalenko turned to him, her face grim. "The Zorax. They'd got a new weapon. Something called the Devourer. And if these schematics are right, it's like nothing we've ever seen before." Renner's eyes widened, but before he could respond, a deafening blast rocked the command center. The door exploded inward, and a squad of Zorax warriors poured into the room, their weapons blazing. Kovalenko and Renner dove for cover, returning fire with everything they had. But they were outnumbered and outgunned, and with every passing second, more Zorax poured into the room. "We have to get out of here," Kovalenko yelled over the din of battle. "We have to warn the fleet." Renner nodded, his face set with determination. He primed a grenade and lobbed it towards the Zorax lines, the explosion buying them a precious few seconds of respite. Together, they made a break for the door, fighting their way through the press of bodies. Zorax warriors fell before their rifles, but for every one they cut down, two more seemed to take their place. And then, just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a miracle happened. A Krell dropship, its hull scared and pitted from battle, smashed through the outpost's outer wall. Its ramp lowered, and a squad of massive Krell warriors poured out, their weapons spitting death. "Come on," Kovalenko yelled, grabbing Renner by the arm. They sprinted for the dropship, the Krell providing covering fire. They leaped aboard just as the ramp began to close, the dropship lifting off in a blast of thrusters. Kovalenko collapsed against the bulkhead, her chest heaving with exertion. Cutting it a little close there, Sergeant, came a familiar voice. Kovalenko looked up to see Karnvak, the Krell commander, looming over her. Despite the situation, Kovalenko couldn't help but grin. "You know me, sir. I like to keep things interesting." Karnvak shook his head, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Did you get the data?" Kovalenko's grin faded, her expression turning grim. "Yes, sir. And it's not good news." She held out the data chip, her hand trembling slightly. "The Zorax. They've got a new weapon. Something beyond anything we've seen before. If they deploy it." Karnvak took the chip, his massive fingers dwarfing it. "Then we will find a way to stop them," he said, his voice a low rumble. "As we always have. As we always will." Kovalenko nodded, feeling the surge of determination. The Zorax may have their devourer, their latest instrument of terror, but they had something far more powerful. They had the unbreakable spirit of humanity, the indomitable will of the Krell. And together, they would face this new threat as they had faced all the others, with courage, with resolve, and with the fury of the righteous. For in the end, it was not the strength of arms that would win this war. It was the strength of unity, the power of a common cause. And against that, even the might of the Zorax Imperium could not stand. In the depths of Zorax space, in a system cloaked in secrecy and shadow, the Devourer waited. It hung in the void like a malevolent god, its form a twisted mockery of life. A vast, organic hulk, pulsing with a sickly inner light, and within its cavernous maw, a horror beyond imagining stirred. The Zorax had long sought a weapon to crush their enemies, to bring the galaxy to its knees. And in the Devourer, they had found it. A living nightmare bred for a single purpose, to consume, to destroy, to leave nothing but ashes in its wake. And now, with the human-Krell alliance threatening to turn the tide of the war, the time had come to unleash this ultimate weapon. The Zorax Emperor stood before the Devourer, his eyes glinting with a cold, malevolent light. "The hour of our triumph is at hand," he hissed, his voice echoing through the cavernous chamber. "With this, we shall crush the humans and their Krell lapdogs. We shall grind them to dust beneath our heel." He turned to face his assembled warlords, his expression one of cruel anticipation. "Prepare the fleet. We strike at the heart of their alliance, and we shall not stop until every last one of their worlds burns." The warlords saluted, their faces twisted with eager bloodlust. They had long awaited this moment, the chance to unleash the full might of the Zorax Imperium. And with the Devourer at their side, they knew that victory was assured. As the fleet mobilized and the Devourer stirred to life, the Emperor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had dared to defy him, to stand against the inevitable tide of Zorax conquest. But now, they would learn the price of their insolence. They would see their hopes turned to ashes, their worlds consumed by the very nightmare they had sought to defeat. And in the end, as the galaxy burned and the Zorax flag flew over every conquered world, they would know the true meaning of despair. For the Zorax were the masters of the stars, the inheritors of a legacy written in blood and terror, and all who stood against them would fall. The Battle of Nexus Prime. The combined human-Krell fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of the Nexus system, the Zorax homeworld looming before them like a malevolent jewel. Admiral Graves stood on the bridge of the Retribution, his eyes hard as he took in the scene. Zorax warships hung in orbit around the planet, their hulls bristling with weapons. And at the center of the formation, a monstrous shape that could only be the Devourer. Graves felt a chill run down his spine at the sight of it. The intelligence that Sergeant Kovalenko had brought back had been terrifying enough. But to see the thing in person, it was like staring into the face of nightmare itself. Beside him, Karnvak let out a low growl, his claws flexing with barely contained rage. "So this is their new weapon," the Krell rumbled. "This abomination." Graves nodded grimly. "We always knew they were monsters," he said. "But this is beyond the pale. He turned to face the assembled bridge crew, his expression one of steely determination. "But we're not here to gawk. We're here to end this, once and for all." A chorus of agreement met his words, human and Krell voices joining as one. They had all lost too much to the Zorax, seen too many horrors to back down now. This ended today, one way or another. Graves turned back to the view screen, his jaw set. All ships, engage the enemy. Fighters, focus on those warships. Capital ships were going straight for the Devourer. The fleet surged forward, weapons blazing to life. The Zorax ships responded in kind, plasma beams and missiles crisscrossing the void. Fighters danced and dueled between the larger ships, human and Krell pilots pushing their craft to the limit. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They knew what was at stake. They knew that if they failed here, there would be no second chances. The Retribution shuddered as a plasma beam grazed its shields, alarms blaring across the bridge. But Graves never flinched, his eyes fixed on the Devourer. "Divert power to forward shields," he barked, "and get me a targeting solution on that thing." The crew scrambled to obey, even as more plasma fire hammered into the shields. The Devourer loomed ahead, its monstrous bulk filling the view screen. And then, with a suddenness that took Graves' breath away, it opened fire. A beam of sickly green energy lanced out from the Devourer's maw, so bright it seared the eyes. It struck a Krell battleship dead on, the massive vessel simply vanishing in a flash of light and shrapnel. Graves felt his heart sink. Kovalenko's report had mentioned the Devourer's destructive potential, but to see it in action, it was like watching the hand of an angry god at work. More beams flashed out, each one claiming a ship, human and Krell alike. It made no distinction. In a matter of moments, a dozen vessels had been reduced to clouds of expanding gas. "Evasive maneuvers," Graves shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. "Get us in close, under its guns." The Retribution surged forward, the Devourer swelling to fill the view screen. Secondary batteries opened up, missiles and energy weapons pounding into the monstrosity's hide. For a moment, it seemed to have no effect. The Devourer's armor was too thick, its hide too tough. But then, with a suddenness that took Graves' breath away, a series of explosions rippled across its surface. "We heard it," someone shouted, their voice tight with a mix of fear and elation. "We can hurt it." Graves leaned forward in his chair, his eyes blazing. "All ships, concentrate fire on those weak points. Hammer them with everything we've got." The fleet obeyed, pouring fire into the Devourer's hide. More explosions bloomed, the monster's armor cracking and splintering under the onslaught. But even as they poured on the fire, the Devourer struck back. Its beams swept the fleet, each one claiming more ships. Human and Krell vessels alike vanished in flashes of light, reduced to clouds of molten debris. And then, with a final titanic blast, one of the Devourer's main tentacles sheared away, the massive appendage tumbling through the void. A ragged cheer went up from the human and Krell crews. They had heard it, crippled it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow against the Zorax's ultimate weapon. But even as the cheer rang out, Graves felt a sense of unease. The Devourer was wounded, yes, but it was far from dead, and it had already taken a terrible toll on the fleet. How many more ships could they lose before the battle turned irreversibly against them? How many more lives would be claimed by the Devourer's insatiable hunger? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a fresh wave of Zorax ships dropped out of warp, plasma beams already lancing towards the beleaguered human Krell fleet. Reinforcements. The Zorax had held them back, allowing the Allied fleet to exhaust itself against the Devourer. And now, with the Devourer wounded but still very much in the fight, they had sprung their trap. Graves felt a coldness settle in his gut. They had planned for this, hoped to take the Devourer out of the equation quickly and then mop up the Zorax fleet. But the Devourer had proven tougher than they had ever imagined. And now, with fresh Zorax ships entering the fray, He forced down the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. They had known the risks coming in, known the odds they faced, and they had come anyway. Because they had no choice. Because the alternative was too horrific to contemplate. All ships, regroup and continue the attack, he ordered, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at his heart. We hold the line here. We hold it for as long as we can. The fleet obeyed, human and Krell ships falling back into a defensive formation. They had bloodied the Devourer, but the battle was far from over. And as the Zorax pressed their attack, as the void lit up with the fire of 1,000 ships, Graves could only hope that it would be enough, that the courage and sacrifice of the Allied fleet would not be in vain, that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way to win. Demons of vengeance. In the chaos of the battle, a single human frigate broke away from the main fleet, its engines flaring as it charged towards the Devourer. On its bridge, Captain Nora Vance gripped the arms of her command chair, her eyes fixed on the monstrosity that filled her view screen. "Status of the warhead?" she asked, her voice tense. "Armed and ready," her weapons officer reported. "But Captain, are you sure about this?" Vance smiled grimly. "No," she said, "but we're out of options. The fleet can't hold out much longer. We have to end this now." She had volunteered for this mission, this desperate, last-ditch attempt to turn the tide. The warhead her ship carried was no ordinary bomb. It was a Nova bomb, a weapon of last resort, banned by every civilized race in the galaxy. But the Zorax had proven beyond the reach of civilized warfare. And if the Nova bomb could destroy the Devourer, it would be worth the price. Even if that price was her own life and the lives of her crew. "Take us in," she ordered, "straight for that wound we opened. And broadcast on all frequencies. Let the fleet know what we're doing." Her comm officer nodded, his face pale but determined. "They'll know, Captain. They'll remember." Vance nodded, her heart heavy. She knew what this meant, knew that she was condemning her crew to death. But she also knew that they had all volunteered for this, that they believed, as she did, that this was the only way. The frigate bore down on the Devourer, its engines straining as it pushed past its limits. Zorax ships moved to intercept, plasma beams reaching out to swat the tiny vessel from the sky. But the frigate was too small, too fast. It jinked and dodged, weaving through the fire with a grace that belied its size. And then, with a suddenness that took Vance's breath away, they were through. The Devourer loomed before them, its hideous bulk filling the view screen. Ramming speed, Vance shouted. All hands, braced for impact. The frigate slammed into the Devourer's wound, the Nova bomb detonating on impact. For a moment, there was silence, a terrible stillness that seemed to stretch for eternity. And then the Devourer convulsed, a terrible scream echoing through the void. Light, brighter than 1,000 suns, erupted from its core, consuming it from within. The explosion ripped through the Zorax fleet, ships vanishing in flashes of light and heat, and at the center of it all, the Devourer shuddered and came apart, its monstrous bulk disintegrating into a cloud of ash and molten debris. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Graves watched in stunned silence as the Devourer died, the Nova bomb's light reflecting in his eyes. He had known Vance for years, had fought beside her in a dozen campaigns. And now she was gone, sacrificing herself and her crew to deliver the killing blow, to give the fleet a chance at victory. All ships pressed the attack. He roared, his voice raw with grief and rage. Don't let their sacrifice be in vain. The fleet surged forward, human and Krell ships alike tearing into the reeling Zorax forces. With the Devourer gone, the heart had gone out of them, their lines crumbling under the ferocity of the Allied assault. And as the last Zorax ship fell, as the final plasma beam faded into the void, a cheer went up from the Allied fleet, a cheer of victory, of survival against all odds. But for Graves, the victory was ash in his mouth. He had won, yes, The Devourer was destroyed, the Zorax fleet shattered. But the cost had been too high. Too many good men and women, human and Krell alike, had given their lives to make this victory possible. And Vance, Nora, she had been a friend, a comrade, a shining example of everything that made humanity great. And now she was gone, lost to the void like so many others. Another name to add to the roll of honor, another sacrifice to lay at the altar of victory. Graves bowed his head, tears stinging his eyes. They had won, yes, but in that moment, with the weight of all those lost pressing down on him, it felt like a hollow victory indeed. In the depths of the Zorax palace, the Emperor raged. The Devourer was gone, his ultimate weapon reduced to ash and ruin. His fleet was in tatters, his armies reeling from the blow. And all because of the humans, those upstart primates who refused to accept their place in the natural order, who dared to defy the might of the Zorax Imperium. "This is not over," he hissed, his claws gouging furrows in the arm of his throne. "The humans think they have won. They think they have broken us." He rose to his feet, his eyes burning with a cold, implacable fury. "But they do not know the depths of our resolve. They do not understand the true power of the Zorax." He turned to his assembled warlords, his voice a low, deadly growl. "We will rebuild. We will regroup. And when the time is right, we will strike back with a fury that will make the Devourer seem like a child's toy." The warlords bowed their heads, their faces grim with determination. They had underestimated the humans, yes. They had not believed that such a primitive species could pose a threat to the might of the Zorax. But they would not make that mistake again. They would learn from this defeat, adapt and evolve. And when the time came, when the humans had grown complacent in their victory, the Zorax would be ready. Ready to unleash a vengeance that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. Ready to burn the human worlds to ash and scatter their bones to the void. For the Zorax were patient, they were relentless, and they never, ever forgot. The Emperor sat back in his throne, his eyes fixed on the starfield beyond the palace walls. The humans had won this battle, yes, but the war was far from over. And in the end, when the last human world burned and the last human ship was nothing but a memory, the Zorax would stand triumphant, as they always had, as they always would, no matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, for such was the way of the Zorax, and such was the price of defying the masters of the galaxy. Fury triumphant. The joint human Krell strike force moved through the corridors of the Zorax palace like vengeful ghosts, their weapons at the ready. They had fought their way through the planet's defenses, carved a path of destruction through the Zorax armies. And now, at last, they stood on the threshold of victory. The Emperor's sanctum lay just ahead, the last bastion of Zorax power. Sergeant Lena Kovalenko led the way, her face grim beneath her battle helmet. She had lost friends to the Zorax, seen too many good soldiers fall in the long, bloody campaign to reach this point. But now, with the end in sight, she felt a grim sense of satisfaction. They had struck back against the monsters who had haunted the galaxy for so long. They had shown the Zorax the true meaning of human fury. Beside her, Karnvak moved with the fluid grace of a born warrior, his massive frame dwarfing the humans around him. The Krell had suffered under the Zorax yoke for generations, their people enslaved and brutalized. But now, fighting alongside the humans, they had found a strength they had never known before, a sense of unity, of common purpose that transcended species and culture. Together, they would end the Zorax threat once and for all, or die trying. The strike force emerged into the Emperor's sanctum, weapons blazing. Zorax guards fell before them, their armor no match for the fury of the human Krell assault. And there, at the center of the chamber, stood the Emperor himself. He was a towering figure, his reptilian body encased in ornate battle armor. His eyes blazed with a cold, implacable fury as he watched the intruders approach. "You dare," he hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. You dare to stand before me, in the heart of my own palace." Kovalenko stepped forward, her rifle leveled at the Emperor's chest. "It's over," she said, her voice hard. "Your fleets are destroyed, your armies scattered. Surrender now, and your death will be quick." The Emperor laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Surrender? To primitives like you? I think not." He moved with blinding speed, his claws slashing out to knock Kovalenko's rifle aside. She stumbled back, off balance, as the Emperor lunged forward, his jaws gaping wide. But Karnvak was there, his own claws meeting the Emperor's in a clash of sparks and screeching metal. The two titans grappled, their strength matched, their wills locked in a deadly contest. Around them, the battle raged on, human and Krull soldiers pouring fire into the Zorax guards. Kovalenko rallied her troops, her voice rising above the din of combat. "Push forward," she shouted. "We end this now." The strike force surged ahead, their weapons tearing through the last of the Zorax defenders. And at the center of it all, Karnvak and the Emperor fought on, their battle a microcosm of the larger war. But even the Emperor's strength could not match the fury of a Krull warlord. With a final titanic effort, Karnvak wrenched the Emperor's head back, his claws sinking deep into the tyrant's throat. The Emperor convulsed, his lifeblood pouring out in a grotesque fountain. And then he was still, his body slumping to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the ragged breathing of the victorious soldiers. Kovalenko looked around, taking in the scene of carnage and destruction. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck at the very heart of Zorax's power and emerged triumphant. But as she met Karnvak's gaze, as she saw the pain and loss etched into the Krull warlord's face, she knew that their victory had come at a terrible cost. So many lives lost, so much suffering endured. And for what? To bring down a single tyrant, to shatter an empire of cruelty and oppression. It seemed like such a small thing in the face of all they had sacrificed. But as Kovalenko looked around at her fellow soldiers, at the humans and Krull united in common cause, she knew that it was a victory worth fighting for, worth dying for, if need be. Because this was more than just a battle against the Zorax. It was a battle for the soul of the galaxy itself, a battle to prove that unity could triumph over division, that hope could overcome despair. And in that moment, as the last embers of the Zorax Empire faded into ash and memory, Kovalenko knew that they had won that battle too. Not just for themselves, but for all the generations yet to come. For a future free from the shadow of Zorax tyranny, a future where all species could stand together in common cause. It was a future worth fighting for. And as Kovalenko looked out over the shattered remains of the Emperor's sanctum, she knew that fight was far from over. There would be other threats, other tyrants seeking to impose their will on the galaxy. But the humans and the Krull would be ready for them. Ready to stand together, to fight and die as one. Ready to show the galaxy the true meaning of unity and the true power of fury unleashed. For they were the guardians of freedom now, the champions of a brighter tomorrow. And they would never, ever back down, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. For such was the way of the human spirit, and such was the price of victory. The end.